It was a typical evening at Lucille, an upscale restaurant in Manhattan known for its exclusivity and Michelin-starred menu. The kind of place where reservations were booked months in advance, and the clientele included the city's elite, hedge fund managers, tech moguls, and old money aristocrats. Among them was Ethan Caldwell, a billionaire whose name was synonymous with wealth, power, and a reputation for cutting remarks. That night, he would cross paths with a waitress named Claire Dubois, a woman whose unassuming presence hid a remarkable secret. What unfolded would leave everyone in the room stunned, as a simple exchange turned into a moment no one would forget. Claire moved through the dining room with the practiced grace of someone who had worked in high-pressure environments for years. Her uniform was crisp, her dark hair neatly pulled back, and her smile was polite but reserved. She was used to serving demanding customers, but Ethan Caldwell was in a league of his own. Seated at the best table in the house with a group of business associates, he radiated confidence, his tailored suit and sharp features commanding attention. His voice carried across the room as he spoke, each word dripping with authority. But when Claire approached to take their order, his tone shifted to something colder, more dismissive. He barely glanced at her as he rattled off his order, his words clipped and impatient. "Make it quick," he said, waving a hand as if swatting away an inconvenience. Claire nodded, jotting down the requests, but as she turned to leave, Ethan's voice cut through the air again. "You do understand what I said, don't you? Or is English a challenge for you?" His companions chuckled, their laughter sharp and rehearsed, as if they were used to his verbal jabs. Claire paused, her pen hovering over her notepad. She turned back to face him, her expression calm but her eyes steady. "I understood perfectly, sir," she said, her voice even. The table fell silent for a moment, but Ethan wasn't done. He leaned back in his chair, a smirk playing on his lips. "Good. I'd hate to think they're hiring people who can't keep up. You look like you're more suited to flipping burgers than serving here." The words hung in the air, sharp and deliberate. A few nearby diners glanced over, their curiosity piqued. Claire's jaw tightened, but she didn't flinch. Instead, she straightened her posture and met his gaze directly. "Would you like me to repeat your order to ensure it's correct?" she asked, her tone professional but firm. Ethan raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised by her composure. "Go ahead," he said, his voice laced with mockery. "Let's see if you can manage that." What happened next was nothing short of extraordinary. Claire set her notepad down on the table, her movements deliberate. Then, in a clear, confident voice, she began to speak, not in English, but in flawless, rapid French. "Monsieur, vous avez commandé le filet mignon, cuit à point, accompagné de pommes de terre truffées et d'une sauce au vin rouge. Vos collègues ont choisi le saumon poche avec une sauce à l'aneth. Et d'entrée ils ont demandé salade César en entrée. Ai-je bien compris vos preferences? Ou souhaitez-vous que j'y clarifie davantage?" The room seemed to freeze. Ethan's smirk vanished, replaced by a look of stunned disbelief. His companions exchanged glances, their earlier amusement replaced by confusion. The French was not just fluent, it was impeccable, delivered with the cadence and accent of a native speaker. A few diners at nearby tables, who had overheard the exchange, began to whisper. One woman, a regular at Lucille who prided herself on her Parisian roots, leaned toward her companion and murmured, "That's not just French. That's perfect French." Ethan blinked, clearly caught off guard. He opened his mouth to respond but seemed to struggle for words. Claire, unfazed, continued in French, her voice steady and polite. "Si vous avez des demandes spécifiques au lieu de allergies alimentaires, je serais ravi de les transmettre au chef. Lucille prend trace au sérieux la satisfaction de ses clients." She paused, then switched back to English, her tone unchanged. "Would you like me to proceed with the order, sir?" The billionaire's face reddened slightly, a rare crack in his polished facade. His companions shifted uncomfortably, their earlier laughter now a distant memory. Ethan cleared his throat, attempting to regain control of the situation. "That's fine," he said, his voice noticeably less confident. "Just get it done." Claire nodded, picked up her notepad, and walked toward the kitchen, her steps as measured as ever. The dining room buzzed with hushed conversations as patrons replayed what they had just witnessed. Ethan's table remained unusually quiet, the billionaire's usual bravado subdued. For the rest of the evening, he avoided eye contact with Claire, focusing instead on his meal and his companions, who seemed eager to move past the incident. But the story didn't end there. Word of Claire's response spread quickly among the staff, who had long grown accustomed to dealing with difficult customers. In the kitchen, the sous chef, a burly man named Marco, grinned as Claire relayed the order. "You put him in his place without raising your voice," he said, shaking his head in admiration. "That's class." Claire shrugged, her focus already on the next table. "I just did my job," she said simply. But the other waitstaff exchanged knowing looks. They had worked with Claire for months, yet none of them had known she spoke French, let alone with such fluency. As the night went on, the incident took on a life of its own. A regular customer, a literary agent who had been dining nearby, approached Claire as she cleared a table. "That was impressive," he said, slipping her his card. "If you ever want to tell your story, give me a call. People would love to hear it." Claire smiled politely but tucked the card into her pocket without comment. She wasn't one for attention, and she had no interest in turning the moment into a spectacle. Still, the story of the waitress who silenced a billionaire began to circulate beyond Lucille's walls. By the next day, a few patrons had posted about it on social media, their accounts garnering thousands of likes and shares. "Billionaire tries to humiliate waitress, gets owned in fluent French," one post read, accompanied by a blurry photo of Claire moving through the dining room. The restaurant's management, sensing an opportunity, quietly praised Claire for her professionalism, though they were careful not to fuel the growing buzz too much. Lucille's reputation was built on discretion, after all. Claire, however, remained unfazed by the attention. When her shift ended, she changed out of her uniform, let her hair down, and left through the staff entrance as she always did. To her, the night was just another shift, another table, another customer who underestimated her. But for those who had witnessed it, the moment was unforgettable, a reminder that appearances can be deceiving, and that even in a world of wealth and power, a quiet voice can command the room. The incident lingered in Ethan Caldwell's mind longer than he cared to admit. Known for his sharp tongue and unshakable confidence, he wasn't used to being outmaneuvered, especially not by someone he had dismissed so casually. He returned to Lucille a week later, this time without his entourage, and requested a table in Claire's section. The staff noticed, exchanging curious glances as they seated him. When Claire approached, her demeanor was as professional as ever, but there was a subtle shift in Ethan's tone. "Good evening," he said, his voice lacking its usual edge. "I'll have the same as last time." Claire nodded, her expression neutral. "Of course, sir. Filet mignon, medium, with truffle potatoes and red wine sauce?" she asked, this time in English. Ethan gave a small nod, his eyes meeting hers for a brief moment. "Yes. And good memory," he added, almost as an afterthought. It wasn't an apology, but it was as close as someone like Ethan Caldwell ever came to one. As Claire walked away, the other waitstaff watched from the sidelines, suppressing smiles. They didn't know much about Claire's background, only that she had moved to New York a few years ago and worked harder than most. Some speculated she had studied abroad, others that she had a hidden past in a place far more glamorous than Lucille. But Claire never shared more than she needed to, and her colleagues respected her for it. The truth was, Claire's fluency in French wasn't a fluke or a parlor trick. She had grown up in a small town in Quebec, where French was as natural to her as breathing. Her parents, both teachers, had instilled in her a love for language and learning, but life had taken her down a different path. After moving to New York to pursue a dream that didn't pan out, she had taken the job at Lucille to pay the bills. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest work, and Claire approached it with the same diligence she applied to everything else. Over the next few weeks, the incident became something of a legend at Lucille. Customers who had heard the story began requesting Claire's section, hoping to catch a glimpse of the waitress who had humbled a billionaire. Some even tried to engage her in French, only to find that she was just as reserved in any language. "She's not here to perform," the restaurant's manager told one particularly persistent patron. "She's here to do her job." For Claire, the attention was a minor inconvenience. She continued her shifts, serving tables with the same quiet efficiency. But the incident had shifted something subtle in her. She began to carry herself with a touch more confidence, a quiet acknowledgement of her own strength. She didn't need to prove herself to anyone, not to Ethan Caldwell, not to the customers, not even to herself. She knew who she was, and that was enough. Ethan, on the other hand, found himself rethinking his approach. He was no stranger to power, but Claire's response had reminded him that respect wasn't something money could buy. He didn't become a saint overnight. Billionaires rarely do. But he was noticeably less abrasive on his next few visits to Lucille. Some said he was embarrassed. Others thought he was intrigued. Either way, he never underestimated Claire again. The story of that night continued to spread, taking on a life of its own. It was shared in boardrooms, at dinner parties, and across social media, each retelling adding a new layer of myth to the moment. But for Claire it was just a Tuesday. She had bills to pay, tables to serve, and a life to live. And she did it all with the same quiet dignity that had silenced a room and left a billionaire at a loss for words.